Today I'm out in the shop replacing the fan clutch on my 2005 F-150 with a 5.4 liter engine, but this applies to any or most modular engines, the 4.6 liter and the 5.4 liter. I'll show you an application chart in just a minute. This fan clutch is activated by a bimetal spring on the front of it. It has a 36 millimeter hex nut for mounting it to the water pump, and then it's mounted to the fan with 4 bolts. Since I'm going through the trouble to replace the fan clutch and have all of it disassembled, I'm also going to replace the water pump. It's just a matter of 4 bolts on the water pump pulley and then 4 mounting bolts to easily replace the water pump. And since I'm going to have the coolant drain to replace the water pump, I'm going to do the upper radiator hose. The upper radiator hose takes a lot more heat than the lower radiator hose and has about half the lifespan of the lower hose. So I'm going to replace that since I have the cooling out of the system already. The fan clutch mounts to the water pump with fine threads, and you can see that I've painted mine. I did that for corrosion protection. These are nice little modular water pumps. They have a O-ring seal on them, and they're very easy to install. As promised, here's the application chart for the radiator fan clutch. I selected a Motorcraft YB3041. It fits a number of Ford vehicles. And then the Gates 43504 water pump. Be sure to look up your exact application. Here's the problem with replacing fan clutches for most do-it-yourselfers. There's really 2 problems. The first is the fan clutch nut is 36 millimeter, which is very large, and it's larger than what most wrench sets have, and it's larger than your average 12-inch crescent wrench. So my solution to that is go to Harbor Freight and buy this large 18-inch crescent wrench. It's still only around $20. You know, all Harbor Freight stuff's on sale. And I know it's questionable. The quality of Harbor Freight is oftentimes very questionable, but this 18-inch is so big and robust that you'll never wear it out. You're only going to use it infrequently, and you'll never wear it out. The problem with it is, on some fan clutches though, you need a narrow wrench, but on this Ford fan clutch, this one works great. So again, most combination wrench sets don't go that big. This is a very expensive set, and it only goes to 32 millimeter. So that's not going to do you any good. The second problem is actually holding the water pump shaft from turning while you turn the hex nut off. And there are some tools that use a pneumatic air chisel to impact, and you don't have to hold the shaft, it just impacts that nut off. And let me see if I can find one on the internet and I'll show you. I'll put an insert in here to show you. Here's an Amazon page for one of the ones that uses that pneumatic chisel, and you can see here in this drawing that he's actually using the pneumatic chisel to impact that nut off, and here it's attached to the nut on the fan clutch. I'll put a link to this Amazon page in this video's description. But you need to hold this shaft, and you could use this kind of a tool. This is actually for holding whatever, I don't know. I guess you could hold a pulley with it. I don't put a lot of confidence in this type of tool. You can get these at Harbor Freight. They're fairly cheap. This one's old. Rubber's kind of hard. You could take the serpentine belt off, and let me go over to the 5 liter and show you this. This is the front of an 87 push rod 5 liter, and it's really set up to have an electric coolant fan on it, radiator fan. But back to this thing, you could take your serpentine belt off and put it on here, and remember, you got to turn this way, so you got to thread it that way, and you could attempt to hold it then. Again, good luck with that if you choose that method. That may or may not work. There's also tools that can get around the nuts. They act like this. They're a big wrench. They're a thinner sheet metal, 1/8 inch thick. They get around all these nuts and fit kind of like that on all the nuts. But this is way too thick to do that to it. It has to be a thin type wrench. You can buy those wrenches, but they're specific to the type of water pump that you have. They have to fit on this just right over the top of these 4 bolts, or over the top of, you know, one side here and one side on the other side, and then the handle is up so you can hold it. But here's the solution that I came up with. You just take a piece of 1-inch flat bar, and it's just 1-inch flat bar mild steel. You can get these at Tractor Supply, Home Depot, Lowe's, or whatever, and it's just a 3-foot length. Actually, this one started out as a 4-foot length of flat bar, and 1/8 inch thick, 1 inch wide, and you have to clear that 10mm head size bolt, so your bolt hole needs to be just a little bit larger than the 10mm head size bolt head. So I think this one's a 7/16 diameter hole, and you need enough material here on this side to be able to pry against it. So what you're going to do is put this hole on one of the bolt heads and then bring it around until it hits the second bolt head in this direction. So you're turning the fan clutch off this way. It's regular threads, so it's lefty loosey, righty tighty, and so you have to turn it this way. So you really need to turn your hex that way, so you got to hold against it. So really you need to be this way. This hole goes on the bolt head, and then you're pushing against that head. And I really put a notch here, and that notch really isn't necessary, but you do need this notch to clear the nut. Let me show you quick. And remember, this has the pulley on it, so it's sticking to here, and you have this, so you have to clear this, but mainly this part of the hex, so you're not pushing against the hex. And then you're inserting onto your bolt head and around this hex. So that's why that notch is necessary, to give you a little more clearance around the hex. Let me also show you this over on the 5-liter. Holding it this way, so this bolt is, this hole is set up for a 10mm. These are 3/8 bolts, 3/8 head size, so it won't quite fit on here, but you can see what I'm trying to do. It comes around and it hits that second bolt head right there and holds against that. So you need to have a little bit of meat right there to hold it, and then it hits right there. So really this is kind of extra material here, but you need that to be larger right there, so you're not breaking it, but it can't be too large so it can fit on that nut. So it needs to be about 1/8 of an inch of material right here for this to work. And this one worked just fine. I probably should have led with this, but here's the reason we're here today, is this fan clutch, the radiator fan clutch, and it has a squeak in it. So in the summertime it hasn't been noisy at all, but now that winter's approaching and it's starting to get cold, it squeaks and starting to squeal until the thermostat engages it, and then it's quiet. So when the fan is actually operating, when the radiator's up to temperature, then it's quiet. But when it's not turning the fan, the bearings in here are causing a large squeal until it does warm up a bit. It's also, when it has the fan on it and it's in the truck, it does have a little bit of a wiggle to it. So these bearings in here are dry, definitely needs to be replaced. Of course, today I'm going to replace the water pump and then the upper radiator hose, both of which are fine. This water pump could probably go another 225,000 miles. This radiator hose though, not so much. I've taken this air inlet horn off many times for videos. It just comes off with a 10mm head size bolt. To take the wind deflector off, you have to take these 5 plastic rivets off across the top of it that go down into the radiator brace, and then there's 2 or 3 rivets that go down into the fan shroud. Mine has one missing, and mine also has the wiring harness attached to these for the plow. The center looks like it has a Phillips head, but it's not really a threaded insert. It just pries out with either a wood chisel like I'm using, a utility knife, or a dental pick. You take that inside out and then the bottom comes right out. With 2 8mm head size bolts, one on each side, the fan shroud attaches with 2 bolts on the top and then has plastic brackets on the bottom that the fan shroud sits in. Here's the drain cock down below on the radiator. I'm using a little vinyl tubing, trying to get it into a bucket. If we can get a view of that drain cock down here. Right down here, where I got my vinyl tubing running into, right there. You see it? Right there. It's got a hex head on it there, plastic hex head. Just loosen that and the coolant will come out. On those hose clamps, slide them forward and then the hose will come off. Just pulls right off. Got the radiator drain cock open down below. Hopefully I'm not going to lose too much coolant up here. Oh, there. It's airlocked. You take off the radiator cap here. See if we can get some more coolant out. Looks like there's some in here. This is my makeshift tool. It's hard to get a camera on this with just one person. This is my makeshift tool that goes on one nut of the water pump right here. That goes on that nut, and then the other nut slips right there. And you can see, I guess it didn't take the abuse too bad. So that holds the water pump, holds the nuts of the water pump while you turn the hex nut of the clutch fan, and use that big crescent wrench and hit it with a ball peen hammer to give it some shock to get it to break loose that first time. And then even if it's extremely rusty, it's fine threads. So once you break it loose, it comes off relatively easy. So that's my makeshift tool. Shouldn't need it putting it back on. Then with the 2 8mm head size bolts, they're out of the fan shroud. You can see my fan shroud's loose. You can now lift the fan shroud up and out of the way. As you continue to turn the fan, you can see my fan's clutch is loose already. But you got to be careful so that fan clutch doesn't fall into the radiator. So I'm going to take my shroud up and out of the bottom brackets, little plastic brackets that are on the radiator, so I can push it back towards the engine. Let me do that. the driver's side first, pull it up and out, and then the passenger side or the right side, pull it back towards the engine, past the transmission lines, and that's probably good enough right there. So I can get my hands in between the radiator and the shroud so I can unscrew that clutch and fan together as an assembly. Keep unscrewing it until it comes off. Down here where my hands are.
Safe to worry.
Yep. Just like that. Look at this. Are you looking at it?
Yep. Top hopefully bed. It's a steering wheel.
These are 4 13mm head size bolts holding the fan clutch on.
Do we get?
Then we'll just use a dead blow hammer. Give it a little love tap. Little good nickel anti-seize on each of the bolts. Now it's easy to get the belt out. Again, always take the alternator off first, it's easiest. Give it a little room here. Gonna take it off of the power steering pump and then just loop it up here to get it out of the way. Now is a good time to replace that belt if you need to. You haven't been replaced in the last 50,000 miles or so. Now is a good time to remove it. 4 10mm head size water pump bolts. I'm being careful with the water pump pulley. Just pry on it a little bit, turn it, pry on it a little bit, turn it. 4 10mm head size water pump mounting bolts. Just gonna break them loose and we'll take the impact. Came out clean. This one must not be blind in the back. Open in the back. Huh. Okay. A bigger impact for that one. So that top one is has exposed threads in the back, so it's going to get dirty. Make sure you clean that up with a wire brush. Use just a little compressed air. from around there. So look how corroded it is around the O-ring here. So I'm going to want to clean that up around the opening here with a wire brush before I put the new water pump back in. Safety glasses and wire wheel on my drill. There is just a little bit of a taper here right on the edge that's going to help the O-ring get into that bore. So I tried to clean that up too best I could. Let's wipe her down and see what it looks like here. Looking pretty good, like that. Shine just a little more light in there for you. Not too bad. Happy with that. Wish that hole on the top, those threads were enclosed in the back. Okay, ensure the weep hole is on the top. That's all we got to do. And all the bolts are staggered, so it's not a big issue for alignment. And we'll put on the right side in. Started top. That's the one with the rough threads. That's the one I'm not too worried about. Want to be careful using my electric impact. Not want to tighten them up yet. Just want to bring them in a little bit up. Not like that. I want it to go in even. So pushing with my hand to get it to go in. And the pulley goes back on. 4 bolts. Again, those are the 4 10mm head size pulley bolts. Just gonna try to bring them in evenly. Too much torque on them to start with. There we go. Now we can put a little torque on them. go. You can go back, pulley serpentine belt can go back on. And let's see, something like that, that, and there. So this. Probably making it look harder than it really is. And there we go. So there, make sure on my other pulleys. I'm not on my AC compressor. And it's easy to be on the crankshaft there. There we go. It's on. And I'm going to do this one last, which is the favorite way I like doing it. And pull down on my wrench, show them back on. There we go. Popped off in a few places. Here we go. And let's double check that. Yep, that's flush. Looks good. Pretty good. But just before we put that belt back on, as I'm pushing down, we should give all these pulleys a little wiggle. It hasn't been that long since I replaced them. We're in pretty good shape. Shroud, get it up here. And fan clutch assembly. That can go down in here. And probably need to move the whole shroud. Get going here. Push it flat, and then give it a turn. I think when I cross thread, it's got fine threads, so be careful with it. It should thread on really easy, those fine threads. Better job with my shroud. She's up there hand tight anyway. Let's see if we can get the shroud in better position here. Might position it better with the fan off. I don't know. Let's see what we can do. Went pretty easy, easier than I thought. Now I'm going to put this wind deflector back on. I'm going to put the shroud back on, there's 2 bolts in the shroud, and then the wind deflector back on, because I have these wiring harnesses for the plow attached to this wind deflector, and I've been sitting on it the whole time, and I hate it. So yours you could take all the way off if you don't have this brackets. And I didn't want to, I probably should have just taken all this wiring off of it so I could take it all the way off, but I didn't do it. So I'm gonna go ahead and put my shroud back on, then we can work on the rest of this stuff. I don't know if you noticed, but I had the upper radiator hose just propped up here, trying to get it coolant just to flow down into the radiator. And I've got all my plow solenoid here kind of in the way with it here, so I'm gonna, before I put the wind deflector on, it's a good time to pull that off, place it. Get one more notch here. Like that. All the way on, all the way back. A little notch right there, a little tab, so it doesn't go too far. Pinch, so that's it right there. Sitting in the cradle nice there. Goes. Had a little brake cap to put on that clamp so it doesn't rub on my wiring harness, just to make sure it's not hitting my wiring harness there. Now is as good a time as any to hit that clutch. And I'm just going to tap it a few times. Torque it down. That's all I'm going to do to it. Seems like the serpentine belt's holding it better in that direction, so it should be in pretty good shape. That's it. Oh yeah, that's much tighter. Fan was pretty loose before. Okay. So this air horn bracket and two 13mm head size nuts. Could probably go back on any time now. That's pretty rusty and ugly, but I'm not going to do anything to it this time. Could stand to be sandblasted, I suppose, and cleaned up. I'm not going to do it. I still have to shut my radiator drain cock off down below, take my hose off, and then refill with coolant. Now would be a good time to do a flush and fill. I'm just going to refill mine with coolant though. So now that we got the coolant back in it, still putting a little bit of coolant in it, got to get it to burp. Make sure that all the air's out of the system, so you just got to run it for a while. Recheck the coolant level, and I can see it move in the reservoir just a little bit when I squeeze the upper radiator hose. So that's a good thing. That means there's some coolant in the upper radiator hose. Whereas they're running the truck, these just get lined back up. The large part push back in. Small little screw gets pushed back in the top. I gotta check my drain cock on the radiator for leaks and run the truck long enough that I can pressurize the system and check the upper radiator hose for leaks. Make sure the system burps and gets all the air out of the system, and then add some more coolant to it. As we're warming up the engine, let me say that at Stiles Automotive, we do general automotive work, modifications, and tips. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing and watching the other videos. Now that concludes the video. If you found it helpful, let me know in the comments, and please subscribe. I look forward to your comments.